Hello, I'm Dapper Dan Gavoston, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals, which definitely count.
And I'm mischievous Mark Ginocchio, and I also own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man. But for me, and really for the rest of the civilized world, the annuals don't count.
Well, welcome to the Amazing Spider Talk, the show where two fans and collectors uncover the strange, fun, and fascinating history of the Spider-Man comic universe. Thanks for joining us for one of our famous review episodes of the Amazing Spider Talk.
Famous or infamous, Dan, we'll never know. Uh, if you want to swing along with us on our journey through Spidey's past, present, and future, subscribe to Amazing Spider Talk on your favorite podcast app. Every other week, we put out a mainline episode of our flagship show, and sprinkled in between, we review new comics as well as interview some of the greatest Spider-Man creators of yesterday and today. This is the perfect time to start listening. Today on the show, Dan and I are going to be discussing Amazing Spider-Man Volume 5, number 89, entitled Beyond, Chapter 15. This issue was written by Patrick Gleason, with pencils from Mark Bagley, inks by Andrew Hennessy and John Dell, colors by Bryan Balenza, a cover by Arthur Adams and Alejandro Sanchez Rodriguez, and of course letters by VC's Joe Caramagna. This issue was first released on February 16th, 2022.
All right, let me get into my summary of Amazing Spider-Man Volume 5, number 89. We start with a flashback of Ashley Kafka's transformation into the new Goblin Queen, or is that Queen Goblin, before she escaped from beyond corporations. She outlines her new higher calling as ruling those she once guided with strength through madness. Meanwhile, Peter is recovering from another successful physical therapy session, but secretly still struggling with the basics of Spider-Manning, namely climbing up walls. Black Cat shows up just as the Queen Goblin attacks the Daily Bugle. I'm not getting all tongue-tied today. Peter wants to help her, but she webs him to the wall to force him to stay behind. Mary Jane is cornered by the Queen Goblin, who has left a deadly trail in her wake, with several murdered employees of the Daily Bugle littered around the offices and falling out of the building. Felicia saves MJ and tells her that she has faith in Ben as Spider-Man, despite his actions towards MJ. But their safety is short-lived as the Queen Goblin grabs Felicia and performs a goblin gaze on her. The gaze convinces Black Cat of her worthlessness, and she prepares to jump out of the building to her death. But in an amazing sequence, Peter shows up and catches Felicia with a web line. Felicia and MJ declare him back as the Spider-Man and give him his costume. He suits up and assures them that he's ready to face the Goblin Queen. Or is it Queen Goblin? I'll never say it right. But then we learn that he's never actually escaped from the webbing on his own, but that Janine actually freed him from his webs. So he's headed off bravely toward certain doom. And that's my summary for Volume 5, number 89. And yes, it is quite the cliffhanger. This is one of those books, I think, where it gains points for having like a really genuinely exciting cliffhanger.
Absolutely, Dan. Well, why don't we get into some of our more granular thoughts about the comic? Why don't we start with the return, I know he's done a few other issues recently, but the return-ish of Mark Bagley. Obviously, Bagley is a legend in the biz, and he seems to be kind of pinch hitting a lot on Spider-Man, going back to even the Nick Spencer run. But what did we think about his work here on Beyond here? Are you a fan, yay or nay? You seemed a little hesitant with Bagley in some of his recent work.
I mean, you have to understand about Bagley is that he is usually brought in as like a speedy artist. I mean, yes, he had his own run, but he's been kind of a pinch hitter over the past few years. And, he's got quite the track record. I think he has drawn more issues of Amazing Spider-Man than any other artist. Maybe JR might have him beat out in that realm. But, he is just kind of a staple on Amazing Spider-Man. And that can be like positive and negative, which is I think sometimes his stuff comes across as like really like kind of standard or rote, or that he was kind of speeding through it. But one thing I think that's always good about Mark Bagley, no matter what version of him it is that he's always got great layout, especially when he works with someone that knows how to give him visual stuff to do. And, do I think every sequence in this is amazing? Not, it's not his best work, but there are things like sequences in this that I think are really stand out. Like there's a particular teardrop sequence that I think is brilliant. And I have to think that Patrick Gleason, who wrote this and is an artist himself, a very good artist, known, and we've commented on his great layouts as well. I have to think that he really set up Mark Bagley here to really hit one out of the park.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that whereas, yeah, there is an essence of Bagley kind of. Some things are just not as crisp as you'd want them to be, but that's kind of, I think, when Bagley comes in on this nature. Although you had mentioned, I think before we started recording, that Patrick Gleason was kind of talking up the partnership with Bagley. So maybe this was planned. I was kind of wondering, well, if Bagley was part of the Beyond team, why is he only coming in now towards the end when they're clearly trying to make deadlines and get this thing done and to make way for the Zeb Wells JRJR run? But I whatever.
Maybe they take him for granted.
Anyway.
He's just around. Like he's just so reliable.
I mean, totally possible. My point being is that while there is like a rushed element sometimes to Bagley when he's working under these circumstances, like he's such a pro that like he still just tells a hell of a story visually. And I think pairing him with someone like Gleason, who, like we'll get into this when we talk about some of the characterization here, but it's like, Gleason does not strike me as someone who's like writing some of his first books here. You know what I mean? Like Gleason has kind of the wordsmithing of a pro himself, but like, again, coming from that artistic background, I think it's just a really good pairing. Like, like there are some writer artist teams that just really, really work well together. I always think of like Dan Slott and Stuart Immonen towards the end of their run there, but like I think that I really like this Gleason Bagley pairing that we're about to get into here. So so yeah, I mean, not the greatest artwork in the world, but like good storytelling, and everything works here from that angle, which is what's frankly for me most important, rather than something that's overly stylish and crisp and clean sometimes.
Yeah, for me, the one thing that really stood out here as a negative for me is like the designs of the characters. Like I think his Queen Goblin is not quite as terrifying as she is kind of like sexy, and I think I preferred the kind of more like brutish, armored up kind of creep that she was under Michael Dowling's pencils. And also, like, I found it a little bit weird, the Peter Parker that appeared in this book, and I don't remember this being a problem with previous Bagley work, although I guess most of the stuff that we saw with Bagley was Peter in costume, because did we even see Peter Parker in the Nick Spencer run? I don't really remember, but his Peter has his like Ultimate Spider-Man haircut from like the early 2000s, and it just like stood out to me the whole time, like, because it's not even how Bagley has drawn the character in Amazing Spider-Man recently. He just gave him like the early 2000s haircut. It's like, did he forget what haircut he normally gives him? It just like every time I saw it, I was like, well, like that's the character from the Ultimate Universe. He just looked way younger, and that stood out to me.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, like you of the two of us would certainly pick up on something that looked more ultimate than than I would. But yeah, I mean, like I said, it wasn't. He didn't hit a home run with some of his design work, but like what he kind of lacks in that, in some of his designs, I think he just makes up in his sequencing and narrative flow. Why don't we talk a little bit about Queen Goblin, don't call me Goblin Queen. I mean, certainly, while she may not look frightening, with under Bagley's pencils, I mean, like, it's quite the body count in this book, don't you think?
Yeah, I don't know that I've seen this many people die in a Spidey comic in like recent years, or maybe ever. Like normally you get like the people falling out of the building.
Maximum Carnage, maybe.
Yeah, right. Like people falling out of the buildings normally get caught by some webs, and there is just like straight up carnage in here. I'm probably I don't mean it in the way that you might think I mean it, because she's a red goblin, but yeah, I don't know. I was kind of like, it really upped the stakes for me. Like, oh, she's like actually killing people.
Yeah. I mean, very, very over the top. Definitely setting up the threat level here. Although, I guess not that I want her to kill main characters, but like, it's one thing when she's kind of like plowing through a bunch of red shirts, but like, we haven't seen anyone of significance bite the dust yet. So, it is worth noting that it's easy to kind of, kill off like cannon fodder, I guess. But
what'd you make of the like clarifications of like her morality or how she perceives her role as a goblin? Frankly, I appreciated it, even if it is a bunch of gobbledygook. Did it clarify anything for you about like who this person is?
Yeah, it's a definitely a unique spin on the goblin concept. I like that it's just not sheer homicidal madness. It's there's a twist to it with her like therapist, through the lens of her therapy background and how she kind of gets into the deeper seated issues of her patients, if you will. I will say though, like the manifestation of that through the goblin gaze is a little weird for me, because it's like, where is this power coming from? I mean, like, like we know that she's powered by the sins of Norman Osborn, which is kind of nonsense in and of itself, but it's like, but so then where does the gaze come from? I mean, it's a cool power in that the way it's being used is creating interesting results, especially like with Felicia here. But like, I don't know, like it just seems very random to me at the same time. What about you? I mean, am I being too critical here?
No, I totally agree with you. I mean, maybe it's a bit of beyond tech through that visor of hers, but I expect we'll see her use it again, even without the visor. And then the visualization of it is this almost like Cthulhu-esque octopus, like manifestations of people's memories, and like, I really want to understand like why that imagery, like why octopus tentacles and things,
right,
that just I don't really associate octopi with goblins or the mind. I mean, it's creepy for sure. Like it's got that kind of like, Cthulhu stuff, but yeah, I thought it was a little bit strange. Does it matter that she has this power? Like, is it one of those things where it's like, it's cool, so let it go?
I mean, maybe, but I mean, at the same time, she's already got something that I think is even cooler than the Goblin Gaze, which is her mace. Which, I'm not trying to like overstate it here, but like, my notes say the Goblin Mace might be the best new villain weapon introduced in this series, and I'm serious. Like I don't know, like it's just effective, it's deadly, it's wreaking havoc, and like it just looks cool when she just swings this thing around and kills a bunch of people dead. I mean, I don't know, like it's a pretty scary weapon, whereas the Goblin Gaze, like say, I don't know, like where is this coming from, but swinging like a demonic mace, that sticks with me. I don't question that.
I also appreciate any goblin story that takes place like high over the streets of New York. Like it bums me out that like we got so few goblin fights in the Spider-Man movies that are actually like him with a web shooter behind them being like thrown around the city, and like seeing her creative use of the goblin gliders as like not only like weapons, but also as like a plank for Felicia to walk off of is cool. Like there's this really kind of cool psychological element to her that makes her kind of fun to read on the page.
Definitely. What do we think of Patrick Gleason's Peter here? Now, I mean, obviously, I think kind of leading up to this current arc, the Patrick Gleason Peter focused issue from I don't know a month or two ago was probably my favorite Beyond issue. But like, so we know that Gleason can write Peter really well, but I don't know. I think he's even doing better here in these stories here. What about you?
I totally agree, and I think not only is this Peter well written, this one is a one that really focuses on Felicia and MJ, and I think not only is this Peter voice great, and there's a nice like solid arc for the character in this issue, but like the focus on relationships like between people that actually care about each other and like each other is really refreshing, because I think so often in these books we get these characters like that are kind of like at wits with each other. And to me, the time when Spider-Man was best was when, that Romita era where, everybody kind of, there was that little pack, a group of people, and seeing this kind of focus on MJ and Felicia and Peter and Ben and the kind of cast around that has been really nice. And the people, they're tender towards each other and they're trusting, and I like all that. I think Gleason stuff is a little bit wordy and a little maybe over jokey in the gravity of the situations, but that's comics for you. So I'm really digging it.
Yeah, I don't really subtract points for some of the jokes on this, but I get what you're saying. But like, I mean, for me, like, and look, I try to resist looking backwards when it comes to analyzing new issues. But we talked not even just during the Spencer run, but even at points in the Dan Slott run about like this idea of like Peter as a bystander. And I think part of the reason why I was a little reluctant to even really get too excited about Beyond was this idea of like, oh, well, it's going to be Ben Reilly's turn as Spider-Man again. And I'm like thinking to myself, man, did they just not want to write Peter Parker anymore? Like, what's happening here? And regardless of that, like, it's not even just that Peter is active, but it's like we got this guy who's just like fighting for his right to be Spider-Man again, and it just comes across so genuinely and so sincerely in this book, and then in the following one that we'll do after we talk about 89 here. It's just so refreshing to have not even just a well characterized Peter and like you said, these relationships with other characters and people who just, like you said, like each other and want to be and want to do things for each other. But like, it's just to kind of see Peter having to kind of not just earn his way back, but like demonstrate why he likes being Spider-Man, that he wants to be Spider-Man. Like, like I feel like that's an element that certain writers of recent past have kind of really obsessed over, this idea of like, does Peter even want to do this anymore? And it's like, here we have someone who's just kind of celebrating the fact that like Peter really doesn't have the skills right now to be Spider-Man, but he just wants to do it so bad that he's just using every resource at his disposal to be Spider-Man. And I just really like applaud that and how that's been coming across.
That's perfectly stated, Mark. Because I have a tendency to try to make everything metatextual. For me, it's been really great to get away from Peter and then see such a good interpretation of Peter, because I feel like this is a character that like has been so mishandled for such a long time, to then just see such an earnest version of him on these pages and just getting away from him. Like, it has me really excited for the Wells run. I know this isn't a comic he wrote, but if this is the approach to writing Peter, which is just kind of like enjoying it, like writing like a book that like likes its cast and wants to spend time with them, then like great. Like, because these are some of like the most kind of standout Peter moments we've had in years in these issues that we're talking about today.
Definitely. All right, do we want to take a quick break and talk about the Slack,
I
Dan?
always do, Mark.
Well, hundreds of listeners like you hang out in our community of Spider-Man fans on Slack. The Amazing SpiderSlack community is absolutely free to join, and you can jump into active conversations with awesome people about collecting, conventions, movies, new comics, old comics, and more.
Yeah, I hang out in the Slack all the time. This week we've been talking about the history of Mark Bagley's artwork in Spider-Man, especially in Ultimate Spider-Man. And I think we've kind of come to this idea, and maybe it's true here, and especially I think it'll be true in issue 90 when we talk about that, is, I think Bagley is as good as his inker is, and his colorists are. And some people make his work sing, and others kind of let him down a little bit. And you can see like that actually in the whole breadth of the Ultimate Spider-Man comics run and all of Mark Bagley's work. If you want to hear more about that and see images as we break it down, you can come into the Slack and see what we've been talking about. It's an awesome Spider-Man community. If you're like bummed out about Spider-Man Twitter and all of the insanities that go on there, where like everybody wants to bash on Ultimate Spider-Man and nobody can actually like anything without hating something else, the Slack is just a love fest. So come on into the Slack and talk to some of your new friends about Spider-Man. And there's a link in the description of the episode. You can click on it, sign up, come in, say hi, and join our little crew over there.
All right, good stuff, Dan. All right, well, you had kind of alluded to this earlier when we were talking about the artwork, but why don't you have at it, Dan? Why don't we talk about this teardrop sequence with Black Cat and Queen Goblin here? Because this seems to be a pretty standout moment of the book here.
Yeah, for me, this was the standout moment of the book. This is the like Peter lifting weight off of him, but done through a different kind of like vein, and it's really purely the visual elements of it that I love. So this is the moment where the Queen Goblin convinces the Black Cat that her life is worthless, so she like jumps off of the glider in like a suicidal way and
plunge.
Yeah, like plunge. There you go. And a tear forms in her eye that like it seems to suggest the kind of like still with it part of herself is kind of willing out this kind of like tearful goodbye. And she's falling and the tear just bubbles up in the air in this kind of beautiful warped way. And then a web just like bursts through the frame and through the tear. And you have these really tall vertical frames that like really make you feel like she's falling. And then you get this really long web line and you see a shadowy figure up on the roof holding it. And we don't know who it is. And they're like, it's Spider-Man. And then it cuts to MJ and she says like, that's not Ben. And then they turn the page and there it is. There's Peter struggling in his hospital gear to hold on to the Black Cat. And to me, this was like a get up and cheer moment. One of the ones you used to write about on your blog.
Oh yeah. And like you said, it's really been a while since we've had one of those moments in Spider-Man history. I mean, I think when I did that blog post, it was like during like Spider Island. And I don't want to say that we haven't had any since Spider Island, but this one stood out to me more so than I think anything we've gotten in the last 7 or 8 years, I would say. I don't know. Am I being a little too glib about it? I don't know.
I mean, maybe. I'm sure we could find other ones, but like I even think about like Amazing Spider-Man Volume 5, number 1. There's that great bit with him beating Mysterio, but like this one is really earned, because we're 15 issues into this run, and this is like the return for Peter. Like, to me, it was really awesome. And then when they give him his costume back and he like goes to climb up the wall and tells them like, that's my secret. I'm never ready. Like, to me, that was like, you go get him, it really felt earned to me. And it put this, like what I thought was already a good comic really over the top for me. Just a purely visual sequence that just, yeah, you're right. We haven't had one of these in a while.
Yeah. And hat tip to Joss Whedon's Avengers. That's my secret. That line will just be used in perpetuity now.
Absolutely.
But yeah, but the ending was great because like even with that great moment, and frankly, you know, not to spoil anything, but I think like the next issue for me had a better moment because it didn't kind of have this bait and switch at the end, which was, you know, we see that Peter didn't quite earn his way back. He wants to be back and he's fighting for his life to be back, but he got an assist from Janine. So I don't know. What did you think about that reveal? I thought it was clever and I think it worked for the story, but it did kind of take a little bit of the wind out of the sail for me.
It made it stronger for me. To be honest, because it was like, oh, like this is how committed he is. You know, it's like almost suicidal, you know, like, but like that's Peter, right? He can't help himself, but, you know, he even lies to them and says like, I'm not ready, but like, he's truly not ready. He says to them like, didn't I get out of those webs? And then we find out, no, actually he really didn't. It's very into the Spider-Verse, you know, the Miles is webbed up in the chair and he has to kind of get out of the webs. In this case, Peter didn't earn it, right? Maybe he earned it in that moment, you know, but like to me, it only showed truly how much stronger he is, you know, as a person. He, you know, he's going to continue to throw himself into danger. And that to me was like such a strong character moment, you know, like, oh, like, yeah, it takes away a little bit, but it's like, that's the Peter I know. He would do anything, you know, and so it made it stronger for me. I read that ending with a big smile on my face because, one, I was like, well, he's going to get into trouble. Like, that can't be good.
Yeah.
Which we'll get into my feelings in issue 90 on that. But yeah, in the moment here, I thought it was really strong.
The fact that he's fighting for it, and it, you know, goes back to what I was saying earlier. It's, you know, it's just refreshing to see a Peter who wants to be there, even if he truly isn't ready to be there, and maybe he hasn't quote unquote earned it. But the fact that he's doing it anyway is him earning it. You know, like that's kind of always, you know, it's you know, power. The great power must also come great responsibility, but you know, even if the power isn't there, the responsibility is still driving them, you know? So, do we want to get into some grades here?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the last thing I want to say about this really quickly is, like, to me, this is a far less cynical take than, like, the arc we got at the start of the Nick Spencer run about, like, Peter losing his powers and stuff like that. Like, to me, this is a much more, like, optimistic, never say die version of Peter. And I just like this so much more. So this one gets an A- from me.
Wow. Okay. That's good. I mean, I'm just a hair below you. I think, you know, I think we're going to, when our next episode comes out, we're probably going to be a little flip-flopped here, but I'm going to give this a B+. We're in a strong run of issues right now. We're ending Beyond on a really high note here. So this is good stuff all around, but B+.
Absolutely. Well, great, Mark. This was a fun discussion. And as for you at home, if you guys find this show entertaining and valuable, please consider supporting us. You know, you can recommend Amazing Spider Talk to a friend. And if you're able, why not become a member of our Patreon?
Yeah, Dan, we can only bring our audience here this content with the support of our Patreon members. And for that reason, we owe the show's success to every single one of them. And with that in mind, we're constantly making exclusive content for our Patreon members.
Yeah, so why not take $3.99, the price of a new comic, and put it towards a month's subscription to support the show and start receiving our Patreon content. That way you'll hear all of our Patreon exclusive review podcasts like this one you're listening to right now on every new issue of Amazing Spider-Man the same week they come out, instead of waiting for them to arrive in our public podcast feed when they turn up on Marvel Unlimited.
Yeah, and if you contribute $10 a month, you gain access to exclusive artwork from famous Spider-Man artists, commissioned exclusively for our members. Plus, every episode we release a new episode-specific desktop background created for us by artist Nick Cagnetti for our patrons to enjoy.
Yeah, but we know it's a hard time for everybody, as it is for us too. So we appreciate anyone who supports the show just by listening and sharing. But if you do have the means, please consider joining us on the Patreon to support our continued existence of the show and everything that we do. In order to get to the Patreon, there's a bunch of different things you can do. Our website has links. There's a link in the description for this podcast. You can click on it. It'll take you over to Patreon. You can see all of our different tiered, things you can sign up for, artwork, podcasts, etc., and help us continue making the show. So, that'll be a lot of fun to have you join us. And again, a thank you to all the members who already make this show possible.
Yes, Dan, but it is that time for all good things to come to an end. So we want to say thank you to you, the listeners and viewers, for tuning in to this episode of The Amazing Spider Talk.
Yeah, this episode was edited by Rick Coase with production support from Andy Myers. Our artwork comes handcrafted by artists Ron Friend, Sal Buscema, and Ray Sumser. Our theme songs were produced by Rylan Bojack, Tony Thaxton, and Spider Madge. So, Mark, until you get caught in the Red Goblin stare, where you and our lawyers admit that we've never heard of the Red Goblin character before, and that our intellectual property rights to the character and that our intellectual property rights to the idea behind the character are forfeit, what's our motto?
Whoa. Well, our motto is, with great podcasts, there must also come the amazing Spider Talk.
Mark, I don't feel very well. I got stared at by Dan Slott and Marvel's lawyers for a while yesterday. I'm having trouble remembering the details of the end of the Slott run. Something about like Norman Osborn but everything else is just blank.
Yeah, me too. And I guess our show was worthless and we should jump off the Goblin glider. No.
Don't do it, Mark. Don't do it.
No, save yourself. He's back.
All right. See ya, everybody.
Good night, guys.
Two men who know the angles, uncover and untangle all the questions and the webs left out to tangle. I'll be in 1962, last Wednesday's afternoon. They'll bend your ears with reckless self-abandon. The amazing Spider Talk. The amazing